we just tested 2 weeks ago a portal on a new Bronco because...
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Already?
Yes. And no lights on the dash. So the only thing that we tested, let me clarify what we did when we tested this. We have an upper gear now that we're in the works, but I took a Jeep gear, I wrapped duct tape around a factory axle shaft and slid it into a Jeep gear and said, I don't care. I took the idler gears out of the portal, and I didn't even put a lower gear in it because the only thing that I was concerned about is ABS compatibility.
Wow. Hey guys, Aaron here with LSK Industry Podcast. We've got a special guest here today, Quinn from 74 Weld. Him and I have been friends for quite some time. When we were first starting up, he was definitely a big mentor for us in the machining world, and we appreciate that a lot. When we thought it'd be pretty cool to get you on here and pick your brain. I think you're pretty well known in the industry, and Quinn has been involved with machining. 5X machining is something you're really well known for. Your portals, which have become huge, and then also just the whole rock crawling community, King of the Hammers, Ultra 4 racing. You've just been involved with just about everything the last 15 years, I'd say you've been doing the machining stuff? 2010, I think. Okay. Yeah. Almost. So tell us about portals. I mean, I know a portal is a gear set inside of a spindle that essentially you can set up like a two-wheel drive vehicle, right? Yep. And have the axle go through between the upper and lower arm and still have the wheel and the hub down low in line with the lower arm. And that's the cool thing about ground clearance that you get with a portal. Yeah, so it's basically a gearbox at the wheel. I think that we're definitely, let me be super clear, we're not the inventors of this, we're not originators. What we've kind of done is tackled it over the last 10 years, and in the process we've developed some stuff for race vehicles. And then we're trying to do a lot of bolt-on stuff now for OE applications. But basically, it's a way to change the wheel center line and give a vehicle ground clearance. Right. And obviously in rock crawling, it's freaking huge. That's how I got into it. Was a couple of my buddies who I would wheel with, they got Unimog axles, and then put those underneath rock crawlers and started developing that way, and they would break certain components. And at the time when this was happening, I was just getting into machining, and I was eager and ignorant enough to go, yeah, I can make that, not realizing like how much time is involved in the reverse engineering, machining, all of that stuff. But I did it because it was just like, it was fun and it was for friends. Yeah. So it kind of evolved out of that, I guess. Did the Unimog style spindle kind of or portal, did that influence you on this design? On some designs, yes. So the problem that I had, I guess, it's like an evolutionary process where if you start with a platform and then you learn that platform and you build off of it. So we replaced the box, and then we started making some, like a kingpin delete kit for them. We did knuckles, we did a hub, we did a bunch of little things. And then it was really like 2015, I think, was Cody Wagner's car. And that had all the real old stuff on it. And that's a 2-gear design, so it reverses the rotation. And everything worked on that except for he was still running stock gears at the time. And then we get to the point where we've made everything in it, including gears, and you take a step back and you go, shit, I should have just started over from scratch. And at that point we decided to actually do that, but it's a learning process. So if I didn't go through all of those iterations and then deal with all the reverse engineering, I don't know that I would have learned what I need to be able to build the product that we have now. So it's a process that it's painful, it's super time consuming, but I look back on it and
like it allowed me to cut my teeth on something.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And inside of the portal, are you guys reduce or having a gear reduction? So are you getting is it just a straight through, whatever you put in, you get out, or you have some sort of gear reduction going on?
I think I can talk about this now. Well, I was back and forth with my attorney last month. So nobody's ever built a 1-to-1 portal. Every portal that's ever been built has been a gear reduction. And it's basically because for most of the applications that have been adopted by OE, the reason they're doing a gear reduction is typically for tire size. So they run big tires on them. And it's just a super easy way to beef everything up, because when you put a gear reduction at the wheel, whatever that reduction is, let's say it's a 2-to-1, that means that everything inside of that spins twice as fast with half the amount of torque.
Right.
So, like, I get this all the time where, I brake, guys think that they're worried about, I'm going to break axles. And I kind of fall back on, well, you're reducing all the torque load that goes through those components. So no, you're not really going to be breaking it. And the prime example I give is like, okay, so Brenthel runs our portal on the front of their all-wheel drive truck. That's a 1,200 horse Danzio big block motor. Yeah. They run a 35 spline axle shaft. To my knowledge, they've never broken an axle shaft.
Wow.
Lauren Healy's car, he runs a rowdy 850, 900 horse Ford motor in that. And he's never broken a 35 spline shaft in the rear. They'll break other things, but taking stress off drivetrain components is huge. With regards to, is it straight through? Nobody's done it yet. We filed for some patent stuff, and we're going to do I think this is the first time I've talked about it. We're going to do a 1-to-1 because I see certain OE applications that there's already a big market. Mm-hmm. And if you think about, okay, so a portal is essentially a 4-wheel drive spindle lift with gear reduction. Take gear reduction out of that, you have a 4-wheel drive spindle lift. Think of all the Chevys and Toyotas out there that don't plan on running a 40-inch tire, can't.
Yeah.
They're already running 33s, 35s. They just want better geometry out of the front end. If you were just 2-wheel drive, you would just put a spindle lift on, right? Well, why not just do that on a 4-wheel drive application? Right. So it becomes a little more complicated, but essentially that concept of a 4-wheel drive spindle lift is definitely something that we're pursuing.
That's awesome. And is it possible that, if you have a Tacoma and you put a 35-inch tire on it and you need to regear the front differential, is it possible you could just be doing that in the spindle instead of in the differential?
Yeah. So I'll give you an example. We have a Tacoma kit in the works right now.
Is that like a bolt-on Tacoma kit?
It'll be 100% bolt-on.
That's wild.
It replaces the whole outer on the front. So it'll be an upright and then the whole portal outer. We're also going to make a billet aluminum lower arm and upper.
Damn.
Just because it'll be kind of cool. Because why not? But we're going to roll this out at Overland Expo West in Phoenix end of May. But that one, so I'm conflicted because I think there's my personal opinion on stuff, and then there's what I think the market wants, and sometimes those differ.
Yeah.
So on this one, we're putting portals front and rear, but we've already looked at things. So our bolt-on application, it's a 1.22 gear set. If you have a Tacoma and you only want to run a portal on the front, a 430 ring and pinion for a front and a 529 rear match perfectly with a 1.22 portal reduction. So you could run portal front, non-portal rear, and have no issues there. And if you look at like a lot of, trophy trucks and all Ultra 4s except for Lauren's, his fully independent one, they're running a portal front, non-portal rear, and we just match ratios.
Okay.
So I make 2 different ratios on the race stuff because some guys wanted a 586, others wanted a 538, and we couldn't get one ratio to match, so I just made 2.
Very cool.
So yeah, I mean, you will have to play around to match front and rear, but there's enough stuff out there. Yeah.
So you mentioned Tacoma. Do you have other ones that you're going to do too, such as like Raptor or Bronco? Or
so Raptor's interesting. We were working on Raptor Bronco, which is essentially track width, all that stuff of a Raptor. I kind of am shelving that because a Raptor, I don't know about Raptor, Van would probably know this, but a Raptor Bronco is 87 inches wide from the factory. Do you really want a 94-inch wide Raptor?
No.
So because inevitably with a portal, you have to gain width.
Right.
Because you've got 2 bearings and a gear set. Now, the bearings are going to be 20 millimeters wide for a standard bearing, the stuff that we use. So you've got, call it 2 inches there, plus you have a gear set, plus you need cases.
Are you adding a lot of scrub radius by doing this?
A little, but it's not that bad because we're moving out and we're moving down.
Yeah.
And obviously, your KPI on a typical vehicle is not going to be 45.
Right.
Because if it was, we'd be better than. So if we're adding 3.5 inches of width and say almost 4 inches of height, what I kind of tell people, and I think, so this is an interesting topic because I feel that in the last 5 years, people have actually understood what scrub is. I feel that before that, and I don't know that Jeep guys still understand scrub because they run like wheel spacers and like
big offset wheels.
And I look at that and go, oh, like it's bad for drivability and it's super hard on bearings. We do add a little bit of scrub. So I'd say this, numbers I know off the top of my head, we're 2.25 inches of scrub on a 5.5-inch backspace wheel on a Jeep. From the factory, I think you're 1 to 1.25 inches. So we're going to add 1 inch of scrub.
Right. But there's that's what's going to happen to get the 4-wheel drive lift spindles.
Everything's
You're going to have to give
take.
something, right?
Yeah. And
something's got to move.
And a little bit of scrub, off-road, I don't think scrub's a bad thing. If you have no scrub, like I feel, and I don't have time in them, you would. Have you ever played with scrub on a side-by-side?
Yeah.
So I feel that.
I mean, that's what we're doing with the X Travel stuff. Is
right. So are you adding that? Are you adding any scrub?
We're leaving just enough to give you just enough feedback so you can feel it.
Because if you have none,
it feels very hydraulic,
and it'll feel almost like you're on ball bearings.
Right.
Like the vehicle doesn't feel planted.
Right. It feels like you're driving the forklift.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you have too much, you'll actually see the vehicle push side to side.
Right.
Which in rock crawling is not necessarily a bad thing because you can get on a waterfall and you can physically push your front end over.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, inevitably we're going to add a little bit of scrub to it. There's just no getting around that. But I don't think we have better scrub than a typical Dana 60 in a typical Jeep format, which is like 0 offset, 4.5. I wish the wheel industry would just pick one or the other. Either it's metric or it's standard, but just pick one. I've always been a standard guy, but I find myself more and more going to, telling people when they ask me, what wheel should I buy? I go, get a plus 25, a plus 30. And the wheel manufacturers now are starting, I feel, to listen and making deeper offset, positive offset in metric terms, wheels. And I think a lot of that is originating out of race too, because look at all the trophy truck class. And I think Ultra Ford gets a lot of credit for this too, is they're all moving to high offset positive wheels. But if you look at every single OE in the history, like they're all super deep offset wheels. And the reason they do that is scrub and more importantly is bearing loading. So if you run a 0 offset wheel, like a 4.5-inch backspace, you're essentially loading the outer bearing on that spindle,
okay,
and not properly loading the inner. And so it's just a big lever arm,
right?
it leads to Jeep guys wonder why their wheel bearings wear out. It's because you don't have the wheels on it that the factory intended you to have.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So scrub is something that, we definitely consider, but if we want to package 2 bearings and a gear and a brake,
it's a lot going on.
Yeah.
So are you going to reuse your brakes, and then are you still using the same components? Like if you were to do the OE Tacoma setup, or are you still running like the factory calipers and rotors?
On Tacoma, you can. We're going to 99% sure we made the decision. We're just going to give you a quote unquote brake upgrade kit, which all that is going to be a Forerunner.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
what's the serviceability look like on these things? Like, are you expecting them to go 20,000 miles and then they need a tune-up, or will they go 100,000 miles and need a tune-up?
We've got 30,000 on a set, and everything looks good.
That's awesome.
What we typically do is we do a lot of oil testing, and I've dove into the whole science of oil with Maxima, because they're local to us. We're in El Cajon, so is Maxima. And one of my main assembler is good friends with some of the guys over there. So they've been super huge on like educating us, and we're going to recommend and supply Maxima synthetic oil and everything that we sell. But we basically are saying it's cheap insurance. It's 2 quarts of oil for all 4 portals. Change your oil when you change your oil. It's super. From dealing with all the race stuff, you learn serviceability, because we're always having to service stuff. So like positions of fill plugs and drain plugs and all that kind of stuff comes from experience, I feel, in race. But yeah, I'm telling people, change your oil every 3,000 miles. I get that like vehicles now say 5.
Yeah.
I would still change my oil.
Right, just for peace of mind.
Yep.
Yeah.
And and in the grand scheme of things, especially if you're getting into expensive motors and that
Does it have a drain and fill port on all of them?
Yeah. So drain plug, and the plug has a little magnet on it.
Okay.
Just little things like that. But we change oil. And so far, on the I'm calling it the longevity test. That's we try and do as much testing as we can in-house, and it just so happens that my lead engineer on this project lives in Bonsall, which is 55 miles from the shop.
So he drives the heck out of it.
So he puts a lot of miles on it, which is great. We will check his oil, and then a lot of times we'll push it a little bit to see, because we know just because we recommend something doesn't mean that people are going to do it.
Right.
So we've done 5,000. I think we did one where we pushed it up to 10,000. And it's interesting. You'll learn like oil on one side will be slightly dirtier than oil on the other.
Oh, that's interesting.
I attribute that to what tire is going to put down the most amount of torque in a road application.
Yeah.
Passenger rear tire.
Right.
Just lots of testing, lots and lots of testing.
Yeah. So I assume a lot of people haven't seen what your guys' shop is like, but I've been in there a couple of years ago, and I was amazed by how many machines you guys have, and I know you've grown substantially. You have. Tell us a little bit about your shop. I think you have a billion different 5-axis machines, and
well, we consolidated, and we're now strictly Hermle.
Wow.
I've had a bunch of different ones over the years. We had a DMG Mori. We bought a Grobe.
You got rid of all those?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. I think there's something to be said for standardization. The Grobe was a good machine, but it was finicky.
Okay.
And Hermle is just, their service is really good. The Germans flat out build the best 5-axis machines in the world. I know the Japanese do pretty good equipment too, but we're basically, I have a bunch of Haas machines, which, they're great for what they are.
Yeah, and we bought one off of you.
Yeah, that's right.
About 6 years ago.
Yep, and then, so when I sold that to you guys, I replaced that with Akumas. I have a couple of those. I'm moving away from Akuma, just to standardize, I'm doing Doosan, Haas, and then all Hermle on 5-axis. And I don't know. I think we have maybe 15 or 16 spindles.
Jeez.
Mostly all mills. We do very little lathe work.
How many guys do you have programming?
2, 3. I have 2 full-time programmers, and then Dylan, who you've talked to quite a bit. He's moved strictly into engineering, but he's my guy when so we're AS9100 because we do aerospace stuff, and that it's cool, but it ties your hands on a lot of things.
Yeah.
So Dylan's still my guy where when I need something done and I need it done in like a day and I have material, I'll just walk down to him and be like, hey, can you program this for me?
Cool.
If the other guys are busy. Because they typically always have a backlog of stuff that projects that they're doing. Like we're doing EV motor housings now for Hypercraft. They're leading the whole EV program with King of the Hammers.
It's awesome.
My programmers are typically busy. So Dylan, I guess, would be the third. More engineering, but that
and then operators, you have an operator for every 3 machines or?
Yeah, well, so we run 2 shifts, just because if you're paying rent and paying for equipment for 24 hours a day, try and use it as much. It's cheaper
just to have more time running.
Yeah, so I would say, an operator every couple machines. And second shift is not like, I wouldn't say it's fully staffed. I think I have 4 guys on second.
Yeah.
But I mean, we can definitely crank some stuff out as needed. And I think part of that is just because we still do a lot of job shop stuff.
Yep.
Yeah.
And it's cool. You said you guys are AS9100. We're going through that right now. We're about 2 weeks away from our final audit, and it's fun stuff.
It is. I can't take credit for that, so I hired a quality engineer to come in and get us up to AS9100. And that guy is kind of, I guess, his role. He still leads quality, but he's also does a lot of planning and stuff for the machine shop. It's a position that's tough to hire for.
We have one as well, and we got very lucky. He started as an engineer here, just designing products, and really liked quality, and it worked out.
It's something that I feel that very little people in off-road have, is like the actual system in place to check and I'm 100% guilty of it looks good, ship it out. Thankfully for our stuff, we have a quality system in place, so it flows through.
Yeah, it's cool even for us, even if it's not for something aerospace. Just the level of quality throughout the whole shop just increases, just the ability to have processes in place to do things correctly and ensure quality makes a big difference across our entire company.
Yeah, I mean, so you're in the process of doing ISO 9000. To me...
Oh, we're in 9100 is what we're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you're doing AS 9100?
Yes.
Oh, fuck.
Yeah.
Okay, so
we're almost done.
So that's what we are. That's what we did. But I think in general, it's good business practice, and if you follow it, which I think it's a positive thing to do. It forces you to not cut corners.
Exactly.
Because when you try to cut corners, you go, fuck, I can't do that because it has to go this way. Like, I think that there's a lot of things about it that are cumbersome and annoying, but it's good business practice. Mm-hmm. Like, it forces you to have internal accountability.
Absolutely.
And I will tell you that flat out it has decreased our scrap rate, and it catches mistakes before they happen a lot of times. Now, it also slows the process down. But again, is that necessarily a bad thing?
Yeah, you're not reworking parts and spending less time replacing things.
Well, like little things, like the person making the part is not the person checking the part.
Right.
Because if you programmed it and you're making it, you could miss something, and you could miss it over and over again.
Yep.
Because well, you know how this goes. If you're staring at a drawing for a long enough time,
you could miss the big bold writing in the right corner.
You could completely miss it. And now if you make that part and hand it off to somebody else to buy off that part, and they go, fresh eyes on it, go, hey, what about this flag note here? And you go, oh, crap, I didn't see that. It's a check and balance.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I feel your pain. I know right where you are, and it's worth it.
Yeah. We're looking forward to it.
So are you going to expand, I mean, doing AS, then you're going to try to get into aerospace stuff?
So on our Cal West side, we already do a lot of robotics for aerospace.
Yep.
So we're trying to get into manufacturing for aerospace industry.
That's cool.
And we'll see what happens. We're just kind of going with the flow, and we've realized that, just like what you said, just everything, including LSK, all the products, our customer products, all that, our quality has just gone amazing.
Yeah.
We've reduced how much we're scrapping. We've reduced mistakes. Our error is super low. We feel really good about where things are moving, and it's crazy because you kind of uncover all these little things like, hey, how are we doing that? And that's what AS9100 does, is it creates a process for everything.
Yeah, I also find that like the documentation that you have to have for things, it takes it out of one person's head and one person's hands. So
makes everything more like light switches rather than remembering the next day what you have to do.
Yeah. Well, and if you're going to grow, I'm not going to sit here and say that you need AS9100 to grow. It gives you the business structure in place to where somebody else can step into a role, and you have a procedure for how that's supposed to run. So it's worthwhile.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did you get in the off-road stuff? I know you've been involved with King of the Hammer since the beginning and Ultra 4 Racing. Like, what is your involvement? How do you know those guys? And where'd you start with all this?
So the whole thing started, I was studying for law school and working on, I bought a Jeep Wrangler in 91, and it was like 2001, I think. Yeah, it was 2001. And I took the Jeep out. I broke, and it's embarrassing to say now. You don't know at the time. So on a 91 Wrangler, it's a leaf spring front and rear, and they run a track bar in the rear.
Okay.
You don't need a track bar on a leaf spring suspension. All it does is bind. Well, so it bound, and I took it off-roading, and I broke the track bar mount. And I took it to Off-Road Warehouse in Escondido or San Marcos to get it fixed, and it was like $400. So the guys there welded on. I pay the bill. I took it out the next weekend. I broke the thing again and realized, like, shit, I can't keep doing this. And a welder at the time was $600. So it was like, do I buy a welder to fix it, or do I take it back? Well, shit, how hard can it be, right? So I bought a welder and learned how to weld. And I was studying. I was at UCSD at the time. I was doing undergrad, and I started getting really into the Jeep stuff. And in like 2002, I started going out to Johnson Valley. And at the time, this was a wild one. I have stories of like going out to Johnson Valley where I'd meet a buddy, and it was literally the two of us on the lake bed for the weekend. And we would go out, wheel, bring like a 30-pack of Coors Light, the Goobers peanut butter and jelly that comes in one jar, and a loaf of bread. And that was like, wow. That was.
When was this? What year was this?
That's 2002, 2003. I was wheeling out there a lot with a couple guys. Mark Underwood, who he was the guy that first put Unimog 404s under a buggy and was wheeling that and would break the stuff, and I would help him fix it. And then another buddy, Shane Henry, who Shane and I kind of met through, this was back when like forums were the big thing. There was no social media platform to organize stuff. It was Pirate 4x4 and a couple Jeep websites. And we met online, became friends, and we would just go out and wheel, and like that's how I met Dave Cole, Jeff Knoll, and kind of all those guys, was wheeling Johnson Valley. It was a very small group of guys back then, and Dave was with like the Tin Benders. They were all Toyota guys. My buddy Shane was a Toyota guy, but hung out with the Jeep guys sometimes. And there was always the rival back and forth, right? And Mark was a Jeep guy, and a couple others, and we would just spend weekends out at Hammers, basically wheeling, drinking beer, and then driving our rigs home. And I look at that now, and it's like, there were times when, you know, you'd break things, and it's like, holy crap, how are we going to get home? Because I born and raised in San Diego, and it's three and a half hours out to Hammers from there. But I mean, that's how kind of I met and know, I guess, everybody from Ultra 4 was, before it was Ultra 4, before that was ever a thing, those were kind of the guys that I just wheeled with.
Right.
And to see all that grow is kind of, it's wild from what I remember it, and then to what it is
huge.
today.
It's one of the biggest events of the year.
And rightfully so. I mean, you were at King of the Hammers this year.
Yeah, I raced the Desert Challenge this year.
It's a cool spot. It's just unique in the sense that the terrain out there. So I don't want to say it's the only place like it, because I think that I think 10, 15 years from now, there will be there won't be a new Johnson Valley, but there will be other places like that. There's so much undiscovered terrain out there. And that OHV park, I want to say, is the largest in the country.
Really?
Johnson Valley's huge.
I know, it's massive.
And we literally, so King of the Hammers, and Dave has been kind of taking us a little further out and hitting some new stuff each year. But like, I know of canyons that are out there that nobody at King of the Hammers runs.
Wow.
Like, I might be wrong on this, but I don't think Dave's ever taken anybody out to Riffle Canyon. They hit Cougar Buttes, but they don't really hit Cougar Buttes. They go through a little section of it and skirt it, but there's so much more terrain out there.
Right.
And, you know, we can't really go too much further east because the military base is there, but it always astonishes me that, like, every time I go out, there's 5 new trails, and there's still, you fly over that whole area and you realize, like, we're scratching the surface on what's out there. There's a ton more. But yeah, super fun place.
So have you raced in these events and any King of the Hammers events?
In 2009, I did with Jack Graff from CTM.
Okay.
He was another guy that would always go out with us. But that was, I mean, so Shannon Campbell won that year, and most guys that were racing were on a coilover. Like, we raced on 2-inch coilovers and 37s. But I mean, that was a long time ago. It's definitely progressed a lot since then. I've wanted to get back in and race more, and I've had kind of these moments where like I had Triton build me a car.
Yeah, you got close to racing.
and realized, so it's tough for me to do, I can't do everything, and I have to pick my battles. And I have a wife, 2 kids, and a business. And if I'm going to do something, I want to do it like all out.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to be able to race and run a business and keep wife and kids happy.
Yeah.
So
that's fair.
I have to pick, and I go, I'm fine being on the back end of things. And
you did race. I thought you had a tube chassis for a while. I remember seeing you prepping the car.
Oh, it
was a play car? Or?
So that was just a play car. That was a quote unquote Ultra 4. I built that in 2000. I think I started it in 2006. That was a buggy that, it back in its day, it was potentially a class contender. Solid axle car, coilovers, bypasses, LS motor. It was, phenomenal car, did great, but it was just a play car. And I liked going out and wheeling with friends. And I feel, for better or worse, and I think you could make this statement 6 or 7 years ago, a lot of the people that, like, racing kind of killed the play wheeling because, and let me back that up with something. So typically, if you're going to race hammers, you're out there for Thanksgiving. You're dialing your car in. You're pre-running it. The big time for us when we would go out and wheel would be New Year's, basically from Thanksgiving through March, April. Now, if you're going to race King of the Hammers, that car needs to be shaken down and dialed around Thanksgiving time. Maybe you go out and do more shock tuning at Christmas, New Year's, and then you're done. So now, prime wheeling time, you're prep and getting ready to race. And every time that I was going to do that, I'd still want to go wheel with friends.
Yeah.
And racing is really fun, but I just didn't want to put forth that kind of commitment. And I also, like, if I'm going to do something, I have no desire to show up to King of the Hammers to say that I raced King of the Hammers.
Yeah, I gotcha.
I get for like a lot of people, that's like a bucket list thing. It's not for me at all. Like if I'm going to go out and do something, I'm going to show up there to win. And the level, I was having a conversation with Jason Shear about this, and he goes, my new car is literally twice the price of my old car. And if you're in that class, well, you could race 4,600, you could race any of the other like smaller classes. That wouldn't be for me. I would want to go 4,400. And if you're going to race that, like, dude, that's the top guys that are doing that. Those are all $500,000 cars.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's more money than I want to spend on a race program at this point. Now, I think that I expect KOH to be around for a while.
Yeah.
And I expect that when my kids get older, if they show interest, I've got an 8-year-old and 11-year-old. If they show interest in it, that's a different
thing.
Then
you get into
it. Then that's something we could do together. And, I definitely am not saying I don't want to race it.
Yeah.
It's just I don't want to dedicate the time that it takes to put together a winning program.
Yep.
And it's expensive in that class.
Yeah.
And that's the only class that I would want to race is 4,400.
Right.
So for now, I'm perfectly fine keeping my head down and manufacturing stuff.
All right. That's fair. One other thing I want to talk to you about was I saw you posting some stuff about Bronco Rap.
Yeah.
So what's the deal with that? Like why make a billet steering rack?
So like it's interesting. The Bronco platform to me is a huge opportunity. I think it's a super rad vehicle. And I think what Ford has done to back the whole race program, I was lucky enough to be part of that 4,600 race program, which we catch. I see a lot of comments online that like, well, of course Ford wins. It's, factory backed program. It is and it's not. So those 3 vehicles were put together by Ford Performance. No, the vehicles were built by Geyser. We had standing calls with Ford Performance 3 days a week for like 6 months to lead up to that program. But as a whole, I think that the Bronco is going to be a super capable vehicle. Now, they have an issue, and let me clarify this. The steering that's on a Bronco is fine for dirt roads and for driving on the street. But if they're going to push it as a off-road capable vehicle, I see an issue with the steering when you start getting into lifts, bigger tires, and specifically rocks.
Is it the insides that you're worried about, or is it the actual enclosure braking?
We feel I'm pretty much certain that it's the housing itself, because the design of it, there's not a lot of stabilization of that. And have you ever opened up a rack and pinion?
Mm-hmm.
So the rack bar on that steering rack was meant for mass production. So the way that the steering rack bar itself is stabilized is it's got like a plain bearing on one side, which is essentially a load bolt.
Right.
And that's the only support on one side. And then on the other side, you have it's kind of a cool, you'd geek out on this. It's a linear bearing with an angular contact bearing around the linear bearing. So it can handle, because a linear bearing, it's great for certain things. It does terrible on other things. Like you can't.
So what's it look like?
So I wish I had a photo of it. But basically you have a linear bearing, which is say 4 inches long, roughly. And on the end of that linear bearing, you have an angular contact. And that angular contact goes into the housing. That's the only way the entire rack is really stabilized. And then they put these plastic bushings on the end, but there's like 60 thou of clearance between the plastic bushing and the rack bar itself.
It's got a ton of slop.
But the reason they do that is because the rack itself, it doesn't really have, in mass production, they're not concerned about concentricity because they have that load bolt on one side and they just slam that thing in. And it's kind of, I mean, it's a cool design in the sense that for mass production, the way they set their backlash on the rack and pinion is with a crush sleeve on that plain bearing. So they just ran the thing in and preload set and you're done. And you could probably, I mean, they're on an assembly line. You got to figure they're going to build 1 million of those things.
Right.
So I started seeing racks fail. And on the 4600 program, we weren't aware of this because they went straight to essentially it was a Howe trophy truck rack.
Okay.
And they fit that in there. So I didn't pay any attention to the steering. And then we see the aftermarket start to develop a little bit, and we see these steering racks break. And I got a couple of them that were broken from Lauren, and I looked at it and went, well, it's not that it's a terrible design. It's just there's no rigidity to the housing, and the rack bar itself isn't really stabilized. So we tested materials on it. Dude, it's a heat treated part. It's not like, it doesn't look like they cheaped out on the internals. It's just, I mean, it's a cast aluminum housing with very little material. You shock load it and the thing breaks. And oddly enough, I don't know that lift kit companies talk about this. If you put a 2-inch lift on the front end of a Bronco and you droop the suspension out, your rack, the factory tie rods on the rack will bind. And now you're essentially yanking on that rack. Well, that breaks them. So then guys they put a clevis on the end. Well, that changes and adds bump steer to it. So we just kind of saw an opportunity on.
So what exactly you did? You made this beautiful 5-axis billet rack housing.
Kind of it. I mean,
looks like eye candy that you just shove all the electronics back into.
That's basically it. So it was funny because I don't go on forums. I haven't been on forums in, I don't know, 10 years.
Yeah, it's a good thing.
It's a good thing.
Yeah.
But I started, we said, hey, we're going to build one of these. And there was like a 10-page thread on some Bronco forum speculating what we might do. The internals of that thing, and so that's an electric assist rack, which I don't think people understand the potential of how badass that thing can be.
Right.
I'll talk about that.
Okay.
But we basically just looked at things and went, this really isn't that bad of a design, and I'll be honest, could we improve the design? Absolutely, but with a caveat, which is if you don't integrate all of the factory electronics into it, you're never going to get it to work. So there's a circuit board on the pinion that reads an encoder that talks to the motor, and okay, you're stuck with those. So we basically just said, look, we think that this is going to be strong enough and good enough. Now, is it going to have enough torque to handle big tires? There was a bunch of debate about that. And so in our testing, we built the housing for it. And what we did is we completely redesigned the pinion side of the rack of that housing and eliminated a bunch of stuff on that. We eliminated all adjustment out of it. And then the way we stabilize the rack or the rack bar is we don't just put a load bolt right behind it. we do a full 360 bushing that's like 3 inches long, and we give a cutout for the pinion to be able to slide in. So you're stabilizing on both sides of that pinion as well as behind it.
Yeah.
And, you know, we go, it's not really, here's the thing, it's not rocket science, but in order to do something like that, you've got to have a high-end 5-axis that you know you can hold a true position on multiple axes. You've got to have the ability to reverse engineer that like pretty precision. And I kind of looked around my shop and was like, dude, we have all this equipment sitting right here. So we did that from talking about it to having a design to go through the machine shop in like 3 weeks.
Wow.
And
it's awesome.
Yeah. And then
it's pretty complex. I saw when you were showing it to me, it's a lot going on in there.
There's quite a bit going on, but you know, it comes down to electronic integration. And when you start playing with these newer vehicles, it's just, I mean, if you unplug, let's say you decide you want to put a hydraulic rack in a Bronco, that affects the whole ABS system.
Right, you lose four-wheel drive probably.
You lose everything. So, you know, having to work around OE systems is something that we're learning. And
it's only getting worse.
It's only going to become more complicated. And I got a chance to. I've seen a little bit of the new Tacoma. I can't talk about too much of it, but electronic integration into vehicles is only going to grow. Like it's if you're not on that boat right now, you're going to get left in the dust.
It's awesome. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So the Bronco, I mean, I think the Bronco is going to give Jeep a run for its money. I think the new Tacoma is, well, Toyota's just a different market. They have a cult following and they develop super cool stuff, but that Bronco has a ton of potential. It just hasn't really been tapped.
Right.
And I have a theory on that.
Okay.
You know the big consolidation in our industry, right? So companies are like Dynatrac was bought by Randy's Ring and Pinion, which is I feel a lot of our industry is going to private equity. And there's a couple major private equity companies that are buying up a lot of, I would say, mid-sized businesses. Terraflex went to Wheel Pros. 4-Wheel Parts has obviously been bought and sold a couple times.
You're seeing a lot of them getting bought.
But you're starting to see the smaller businesses, Cambergs, Dynatrac, Terraflex. You're seeing a consult Fox, you know, with BDS and JKS, and like all these brands are kind of consolidating. And I have a theory on this, is that I think that in the next 5 years, there's going to be a huge opportunity in off-road for guys like us who have the ability to do fairly rapid R&D. You don't see a lot of stuff out for the Bronco. And I don't think that that's because, so at first it was, well, it's because Ford can't ship vehicles. Well, Ford's shipping more vehicles than Jeep is right now. They're shipping Broncos. They're making them. Well, why is the industry not catching up? R&D, you've done a bunch of it. It's expensive.
Right.
My theory is that there's going to be a hole in the market because these companies, as they consolidate, I feel that they're not going to want to spend a ton of time in R&D. They're consolidating to try to bring a bunch of things under one roof, and in the process, they're able to cut their costs and increase profit margins, which is smart. It totally makes sense, but then are they going to let this stuff fall by the wayside, and who's going to do the R&D? And I think Bronco's a perfect example of that. Is the industry is waiting, right? And there's a lot of people paying attention to the Bronco, but there's not a lot of stuff coming out. So like Baja Kits has a lift for them. I don't really know of that many other companies making suspension kits.
Well, we're got one in the works right now.
I know, and what you guys have is going to be super badass.
Yeah.
But I just feel that, you know, I'm somebody that if I'm not doing R&D, I'm restless and I'm bored.
Okay. That's
my biggest problem is
you've got the resources and you got the brains to do it. You may as well.
Well,
you know, attack something that's got some room for product growth.
So it's for us is picking the right projects, I guess. So I feel that, you know, the Bronco steering was low-hanging fruit, and man, if we can get this figured out and working, which I feel we have now, I think that I think that it could be a big product. And I think that like we just tested 2 weeks ago a portal on a new Bronco because
you did?
Yeah.
Already?
Yes. And no lights on the dash. So the only thing that we tested, let me clarify what we did when we tested this. We have an upper gear now that we're in the works, but I took a Jeep gear, I wrapped duct tape around a factory axle shaft and slid it into a Jeep gear and said, I don't care. I took the idler gears out of the portal and I didn't even put a lower gear in it because the only thing that I was concerned about is ABS compatibility.
Wow. Yeah.
And because it's not, so vehicles used to always run tone rings. They don't run a tone ring anymore. Everything's based on, which you're familiar with, the magnetic encoders.
Yes.
So
which are not fun. You cannot imitate them well.
you can't, but you can.
Right.
So we were able to figure out the magnetic encoder for Ford's ABS system in the Bronco, which they're still running a tone ring on the rear.
I'm gonna have to pick your brain on that.
Yeah. And so we strictly testing ABS. And it was funny because the way we did the test, and this will tell you how complicated the vehicle was, we get there and we go, oh, the brake line's not long enough. If you lengthen a brake line on a new Bronco, there's a chance that you will throw an ABS code because
of volume?
Because of volume.
How the hell is it no volume?
So,
and that's something you ran into, like you?
Yes. So I threw a spacer in the brake caliper and I zip tied it up. Just a quick, grab me a spacer and zip tie the caliper up and back it out. So I pump the brakes, I go to back it out. The whole dash freaks out. Vehicle locks up, shuts down.
What?
Shit. So I'm there. I'm like laying. I think I was actually on a run that night, and was like, okay, well, I can still make this work. We machined a spacer the exact width of the rotor. Threw that back in. Lights went away. We didn't have to flash anything.
What?
Lights went away. Everything was happy. Okay, so we zip tied everything up and went out for a test drive, and were able to drive around the block. No front brakes, no front brakes on a new vehicle. The back brakes don't stop for shit.
Yeah.
So we were able to test that and get it to work. But now we're calculating, okay, if we put an extended brake line on, how do you compensate for the extra volume in the system? And you'll have to change the rotor slightly narrower to get the pistons to move forward to be able to account for the extra volume.
Shit.
And it's like it's one step forward and two steps back.
Right. Yeah.
But this is just what we're going to have to deal with. And if this is what other companies are running into, I feel that
it's gonna be hard for them to break through.
Yeah. I mean, they're gonna throw their hands up, and people will figure it out. It's not like, I don't think anything we do is rocket science.
It's just a delay. It takes everyone a little bit longer, a couple of years to get caught up.
Yeah. So that was an interesting one, and I know that it's one after the other on all that stuff. So like on that, have you seen the Bronco that Lauren and Vaughn built, the Fun Haver XL? So they tried to put, which makes perfect sense, take the caliper off, let's throw a Willwood 6 piston on that. Like a week before there was a Bronco event out at Sand Hollow. Lauren calls me and goes, or I think we talked about it at KOH. And he goes, we're going to have to put factory calipers back on. Supposedly there will be an aftermarket kit for those, but like you can't, with new vehicles now, like you can't just take the calipers off and put a Wilwood caliper on. It doesn't work. The whole system freaks out because of volume in it. But, you know,
I'd be interested to figure out how the hell is it figuring out how much volume of fluid you have in the system.
I figured out some of that stuff. I'll share with you off air. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't want to give away all the R&D that we've done. I guess I love sharing that stuff.
Yeah.
Like I talk with a handful of people in the industry, and I'm all for sharing of information, because I mean, how many times have I called you going, hey, I think you've done this. Give me some insight. And you've always been willing to share stuff with me. And I like that kind of reciprocity. Yeah. I'm a huge fan of collaborating with people within the industry.
Yeah, gets you one step forward faster, right?
But I don't want to necessarally hand all that information out to everybody.
Right.
It's
especially something you're putting a lot of effort into.
A lot of effort. But that's just what the way vehicles are going, is they're just going to be complicated. Mm-hmm. And there'll be ways to get around it.
You know, hire an electrical engineer here just to build a off-road suspension.
Yep. Well, so I have this guy who he worked at Rivian, and then he was at Tesla first, and then he went to Rivian, and now he's freelance. He's contract, and he understands all this stuff to a whole different level. He's been really helpful. Like I had a meeting about some Tesla stuff today, and I called him and go, hey, Ryan, how do I do this? And he, you know, because he was at Tesla, he goes, oh yeah, you'll never be able to. Well, what do you mean? Like we want to change the tire size on a Tesla vehicle. Specifically, we're looking at Cybertruck.
Okay.
And that's going to be a bit more complicated, but yeah, if you don't have access to a systems engineer that knows electronics, man, I don't know how
you're not going very far.
I don't know how you're going to figure a lot of.
You pretty much need, like in any of the stuff that someone put together in a company, you need like the original source or the person who wrote the code for it.
It comes down to you need to know the right people at the right places, right?
Because a lot of your sensors now are they're not 12 pins, they're 2 pins. It's a pulse train. It's got a protocol. Well, how the hell are you going to know what that protocol is?
Know the right people. So I mean, that was one of our huge hurdles: is how do you reverse engineer the ABS system on the new Ford vehicle?
Yeah, good luck. Well, maybe you've done it.
We did it.
Okay, wow.
We did it. It was some hurdles, and well, it's like anything. I feel is if you have a network of people, somebody knows somebody who knows the answer to it. So I knew somebody. Oddly enough, the way I got all the answers to this was I was drinking beer after. So my oldest, my daughter's 11. She plays lacrosse, and I'm sitting there and we're having a beer after a game, and I'm talking with one of the dads, and my wife goes, "Oh, both of you guys are in the automotive industry." I didn't know what he did in the automotive industry, and so I trying to explain a portal gearbox to somebody who, first off, isn't in automotive at all. It's like, I typically don't go that road, or I'll just say, oh, I make gearboxes for off-road vehicles. And I leave it at that, right? Mm-hmm. And I say, and he goes, you know, oh, and I said, oh, I'm just dealing with some logistics things I can't figure out. I'm trying to get a wheel bearing. And he goes, oh, what's the wheel bearing? And I said, well, it's a modified version of a Super Duty unit bearing that we're trying to do for a Jeep application. He goes, what's the part number? And I go, well, it's a Timken. It's a 40. It's a, what is it? 4020 4120. So I give him the part number. I rattle it off the top of my head, and he goes, oh yeah, I know that. He goes, I make that part number for Timken.
Wow.
And I go, well, who are you and what do you do?
What are the chances of that?
So he is a small minority owner in the largest aftermarket wheel bearing company in the United States.
Holy cow.
He makes
Jackpot.
He makes all the wheel bearings for AutoZone and Napa and like you name it. And so I go, so I start talking to him.
So he's got that figured out, the electronics.
So he is able to help me with the electronic side. And not him, I mean, not him personally. He hands me, oh yeah, you can call this engineer. Mm-hmm. So I took a Ford unit bearing and took it to this company, and between us, them, and then a third-party systems engineer, the three of us were able to collaborate and reverse engineer the thing.
Awesome.
That's
incredible.
It matters who you know.
Right. It does.
So, yeah, I guess looping around the Bronco stuff is, I think it's a perfect platform to see where the industry's going.
Right.
And I think it's very telling that I can't say that nobody's working on a lot of stuff for Broncos. I just feel that if you look at Jeep by year 2, or I guess technically we're on 2023, mm-hmm. They came out in 2021. There was a lot of stuff out. There's not a lot of stuff out right now.
No.
And with Toyota releasing the 2024 Tacoma, it's going
to be unreal.
It's going to be a lot of the same stuff that we're dealing with right now. So the rack. So one of the things I think is super cool on this, I was talking to Brad Lovell about this, and he made a comment to me that when they first started driving the DR Bronco, are you familiar with that thing? Mm-mm. So this is the like $250,000 race vehicle that Ford released that sold out like day one, pretty much.
How many did they make?
200.
Okay.
200 or 250, something like that. It's a project led by Multimatic.
Okay.
And you basically had to put in an application to get the vehicle because Ford wants you to race it. So I talked to Brad Lovell about the steering rack and said, hey, are you having issues with these? And he goes, no, not really. But he said one of the issues he had was when they would hit chatter bumps under braking, it would like rip the steering wheel out of his hand. And I'm not going to give too much info because I'll hint at what we're looking to do. Through programming in that steering rack, they were able to take, when they start braking on chatter bumps, the feedback that goes into that rack, they're able to mitigate those forces by having the motor absorb loads and smooth out the steering under those conditions. So it went from, and Brad is one of those guys that there's a few drivers in the industry who can really describe what they're feeling when they feel it in a way that like you can translate to real data. I think it's something that's kind of hard to do. Mm-hmm. Brad's super good at this. He basically described it, work with engineers at Multimatic and Ford, and they're able to write a program for the rack that under braking load, when the feedback comes into the steering rack and wants to rip it out of his hands, the motor takes up that slop. And it's not really slop. The motor takes up those loads and smooths it out. That's something that you'd never get on a hydraulic system because it's just a dumb system, right? It's just basically a dividing piston with a port on either side, and you push fluid back and forth. That motor can be active and absorb backfeeding energy into the system and pull it out of your hands. And that kind of got wheels turning, and I went, oh shit, we're going to be able to do a lot with these. So the whole concept of electric assist steering, I think, has a huge future application.
It does.
In racing. But I don't see that. I mean, I see that maybe 5 years down the road.
It's making something strong enough. So hopefully
maybe
you can come out with something that's a steering rack. The
problem with, so we're going to actually put our rack in Bailey Cole's 4600 because he went out and raced the Mint. And in Ford Bronco 4600 fashion, that vehicle has swept the podium every single qualifying and swept the podium every single race it's ever entered, with the exception, so first, second, third, with one race where Vaughn hit a tire that was moved into the race course and rolled the vehicle, but they've won every single race they've ever entered. And it's not that class, that to me is a testament to good prep, but just a good platform. And Ford doesn't back that program anymore. That's those guys prepping their own vehicles, there's no factory budget there. That's a good vehicle. It's a good platform. So we're putting a rack in Bailey's because he can't race Class 7 because he has that hydraulic rack, and it didn't come with a hydraulic rack. Oh. So I talked to Bailey about it and went, yeah, dude, I'd love to put a rack in that thing, because every product that we currently have, we've developed in race vehicles. And I was kind of a little torn on the rack thing, because a lot of people in our industry will call it a race kit or call it like, oh, this is a race product. But I'm a big fan of develop it on the race and then figure out a way to make it somewhat moderately cost effective to bring it to mass market. And I've been sitting there on our rack going, and I think that like one weekend of racing is better than a year of driving it, going out on the weekend.
You're absolutely right.
You know this, you do shit in a race car that you would never typically do, even in a normal testing scenario. Yeah. And you push the vehicle so much harder. So we're going to get to put the rack in actual race vehicles.
And if they last, it's ready.
And if they last, yeah. Well, as it stands right now, we've got Lauren's car on 42s, and he's stuffing that thing into holes. No issues. But yeah, I'm excited to actually test more on a physical race car.
Hell yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you coming out here. It's cool, like, learning about your history, and I know we've known each other a long time. You've been a big mentor to me and
thanks,
in this place, and I always call you when I'm stuck on.
Well, and likewise, I think that it's cool to develop relationships in the industry, and you guys do a lot of stuff that I can't and don't do, and sharing of knowledge is really cool.
It is. It's cool. Well, I really appreciate you coming by and taking a tour of the place. And
it's cool to see the new building too.
Yeah, thanks, man.
Thanks.
Cool. Well, if you guys, make sure you follow us and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Let us know if there's anyone else you'd like to see on this, and we'll see you guys next time. Thank you for watching.